because there's so much more about just dealing with people and knowing people.
Everybody's up in arms, like, yo, where'd the music go? What happened to the music?
And so they have to shuffle it around between their legs, moving around the area.
Welcome to the Daily Coaching Football Show, where we talk football insight, player and coach development. This is your host, David Webb, and I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by guest coach Marc D'Amici. Marc, thank you very much for joining me. If you can, introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers and let them know a little bit about you.
No worries. Good to be on. Name's Marc D'Amici, obviously, from Australia. I've had a number of roles within football over the last however many years, in a few different countries: Australia, the UK, Italy, and Tonga. Most recently, I've been working as an FA affiliate tutor and an FA coach mentor. Fantastic.
Really good experiences there, and I think it'll be vital to today's conversations and discussions. So I'm really excited to have you. And without further ado, let's get into our first section of the show, which is the discussion of the week. So this week's discussion of the week is the difference between a coach and a mentor and the different effects that this has on a player's development. So Marc, first thoughts. For you, what is a coach and what is a mentor?
So for me, a coach is someone that helps players find their own solutions to problems, whereas a mentor is a more experienced guide who someone can rely on to point them in the right direction for solutions or ways to solve problems.
Nice. It's interesting because it's very similar to the debate between a coach and a teacher. Like, there are so many sort of similarities and crossovers with both of those sort of like titles or terms, if you want to call it that. But the reason why I kind of wanted to discuss this was because I kind of feel as though recent discussions, which I have had with a lot of players and coaches as well, is that when we deal with players, obviously coaches are a big theme and a big thing, and a lot of people want to go into the coaching industry and become coaches. But not many people, and it's more so like you just mentioned, sort of more the sort of experienced people that label themselves not as coaches, but as mentors. And I kind of feel as though that actually the game's in a real big need for more mentors of players. Now, obviously, coaches, you typically think technical wise, whereas mentors, yes, they can obviously be that technical guide for you as well, but you'd almost kind of focus on a bit of the psychological slash a bit of social as well, because I suppose it's building that relationships part of it. What do you see it as? Do you see it as one's technical purely and solely and one sort of psychological, or do you think that, again, there is that sort of crossover between the two?
There's definite crossover, but I think the whole idea of a mentor for players, in my mind, sits completely apart from a player's involvement with a particular club or a particular institution, because realistically, a mentor needs to be someone that a player has complete trust and faith in, and that mentor might be from totally outside of the realm of football. Just because they are a mentor and that person is an aspiring footballer doesn't mean that that mentor actually needs experience within football, because if you're seeking out to grow the parts of yourself that you deem to be deficient or needing work on, that doesn't necessarily need to be football. It could be an anger management issue, or it could be any number of things that don't specifically have to do with football. So for me, it's about players seeking out the right person to give them the right experience at that right moment.
Do you know, that's a fantastic point you raise there, because it almost leads you to thinking that a mentor is almost like a bit of a life coach in a way. And again, I know I'm confusing things because I'm using the terminology coach, but do you know what I mean? It's kind of like that person who guides you through life. Like you said, it may be sort of through behavioral management. It may be advice in terms of even things like such as, you know, the right things to eat, the right things to do, the right people to talk to, the right circles to have around you. And it's interesting you mention that, because again, I've kind of always typically thought of a mentor as somebody, and we kind of briefly touched on it, as being somebody who's really experienced. And obviously, like I said, may not necessarily be within the football field, but just in terms of experience within their knowledge and just understanding of life, really. But do you think that then that kind of makes or leads to the point where a mentor could be potentially a friend or a parent, as well as somebody who's also experienced? Or do you think that actually, come to think of it, they need to be two separate things, and that mentor, or sorry, that friend or parent is a support mechanism, but not necessarily a mentor?
I think parents and friends serve a dual function, in that they do offer a level of support that individuals need. But I think there's a definite need from a player's perspective, or anyone's, for a degree of confidentiality which is completely separate to their personal life. Because, you know, it could be a young player, 15, 16, in the academy system, who wants to go talk to someone about, you know, they're having, and this might just be something they're having issues with their sexuality, which a lot of kids do at that age. And they may not be prepared to talk about that with someone in their friendship group, or with their parents. They might, you know, it might be a cultural thing, or it might just be a societal pressure thing, that they're not able to access that support through those mechanisms. So it's healthy and helpful to have another outlet.
Yeah, definitely. And also as well, interesting on that point, you kind of think, like you said, in terms of being able to have confidentiality and trust and that relationship process, that with coaches, usually when you think of the sort of environments or settings in which you will find a coach within, will be one coach and say 15 to 30 children or players. Whereas when you think mentor, it's usually kind of on a one-to-one basis. Doesn't always have to be, but typically that's how you kind of envisage that happening, that process happening. And I think you raise a really good point there about, like you said, in being able to be trusting of that person and be able to confide in them with these matters that, like you said, all sort of players will go through. And that actually, with mentors, there is more of that personal touch and approach, because it is more in those one-to-one settings. Whereas a coach, don't get me wrong, coaches still have responsibilities of caring for their players, setting correct environments, being able to support them through all the sort of four corner stuff. But maybe players get lost in those sort of settings in terms of being able to face and deal with matters like that. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's like, as coaches, we're often conditioned to think about our role as preparing for optimal performance. So we're basically trying to get players to perform tactically, technically, but within all four corners, but with the express goal of optimal performance come match day. Whereas a mentor has the capacity to go, you know, scrap that. I'm focused on the individual that's in front of me. And that's a really, really powerful thing. And that's not to say that coaches shouldn't invest more in all four corners and developing their players across all four corners. It's just a recognition of the fact that ultimately their goal, or their MO is to optimize performance. Whereas a mentor is looking at that one individual as a holistic being and trying to allow them to grow.
Yeah, definitely. And just taking it back for a second, because at the start, when I asked about what's a coach, what's a mentor to you, you mentioned something about sort of that takeaway from that sort of institutional setting or environment, or organizational setting or environment. Do you think sometimes there's a bit of a clash between coaches and mentors? So say, for example, I mean, obviously this would be coached in two different scenarios. Coaching where you may go into a sort of recreational session where you go weekly and, you know, they're there for your technical development, all the four corner stuff, but, you know, they're just purely there to help you train. Whereas if you play under a coach for, say, for example, a team where they're with you probably over a bit of a longer process, do you think there's sometimes a bit of a clash with a coach and a mentor? So, i.e. a coach thinking that a player needs X, Y, Z, and a mentor goes, actually, do you know what? They don't. This is what they need. Like you kind of said about, you know, a mentor might say typically, you know, don't worry about the match day stuff. This is what you need to focus on in terms of building you as an individual?
I think there's definite there needs to be an understanding of roles and responsibilities. And I don't know that a mentor would necessarily come in and try and run roughshod over the instructions of someone else. It's about finding a balance for whatever's best for that individual.
Yeah, 100%. I suppose it's they almost pick them up, don't they, mentors, in terms of, you know, a player might come to them, or a parent might approach a mentor and say, look, do you know what, I need my son or my daughter to have a bit of guidance, really. Obviously, their coach is working with them on this, and this is how they almost find the player. Like, so how the player is at that time, then, like you said, really, it's the mentor's responsibility and role not to tread over or disagree with what the process in which already is happening, but to kind of support them in association and alongside that process that's already happening with the coach, in a way.
Yeah, and then if the player's having issues with certain technical aspects, or they're finding that they're having certain problems, whether it be communicating or dealing with again anger management or something like that, it's incumbent on the mentor then to help them find the solution. Whereas a coach is trying to build things into their practice to help that individual discover it within themselves. Yeah,
it's a fantastic point you made there about the elements of how they bring it out, but within a session, whereas a mentor will bring it out within the individual almost to an extent. It's interesting again, because we mentioned that typically, like with mentors, you'd kind of, and even with some of the points there, I mean, I'll be honest with you, for some coaches, especially if they're brand new coaches, a lot of that will go over their head in terms of, you know, really understanding. Even for me, some of the sort of terminology, some of the deeper sort of thoughts, feelings, and emotions in which you will need to understand and be able to help and support those players through different situations and scenarios is challenging. Like, this is top stuff that we're talking about almost here.
Well, yeah, totally. I mean, I've been coaching 18, 19 years now, and I'm still learning day to day. Like, you know, just the other week reading Brené Brown's Daring Greatly, and just learning about I already knew it to a certain extent, but learning about the power of vulnerability when you're coaching or leading groups, and how to be more vulnerable and allow that to lead change in the group that you're working with. So, I mean, it's a journey. It's just about, the more and more you know about coaching, the less and less you need to know about football, if that makes sense, or the amount of the pie that it takes up diminishes, because there's so much more about just dealing with people and knowing people and helping them achieve their goals and grow. That really takes up so much more of the pie nowadays. But yeah,
no, I'm saying, I think as well, I've heard so many people say the phrase, it's the person that comes first, then the player. And I think that kind of hits the nail on the head with that. And like you said, I think typically when you first go into coaching or coaching mode, it's very much, like you said, technical heavy. It's, you know, the focus on how do I develop these players these people as players. But like we're saying, actually, because it's a person that comes first and then the player, well, actually, these mentors, because they potentially are a bit more experienced and a bit more clever with how they bring things out almost, you know, it goes back to the whole sort of guided discovery type elements, problem solving type elements, the puzzles. You know, how can you, as a mentor, coach, you know, however you want to frame it, sort of set these little traps in almost, or how can you put in certain questions or phrase certain questions to be able to help support and see these players through in a way? Because again, if we're talking about these people being experienced, and this is not to sort of disrespect coaches who just come into the game from an early phase, but typically you think that these coaches probably aren't paid that much money. You know, they typically might be on, say, for example, £10 an hour. And it's not to necessarily say that they're being paid for their quality, because some, you know, level 1 coaches, level 2 coaches, even coaches who don't even have their badges, are super knowledgeable and actually probably understand the player better than some of these coaches who have all the badges. But in a way, do you feel that when you think about a mentor, if I was to say to you, you're a player and we want to work with you in terms of getting you a mentor, that typically a mentor would be at more of a financial cost than, say, for example, a coach, where typically you could pay, anything from £5 to £10 an hour for a coaching session. Whereas to get a mentor, we're probably talking anything from £20 to £50 just for that hour. It's almost a bit of a consultation.
Well, yeah, but it's about the value that you get from a mentor, and I see the value coming much more deeply than what you would get from a coach. Doesn't matter the rate that they're getting paid at. It's all about the outcomes that you get from that individual, and it's the benefit that you see in it. If you don't put the work in to try, if you're hiring someone to try and help you develop and grow, and it's those things around football that are holding you back, then seeking help and that makes you better, no matter what realm that's in, whether that's just your mental health or football, is always beneficial, because realistically we've only got one life, right? So whether it's investment in your health, your mental health, or the development of your football, if that's something you want, then do it.
Yeah, 100%. And do you know what? Again, I love that point you make about value, because I think that's crucial as well, because typically we think, that's just like the set price that you'd pay for something. But actually, like you said, it's not looking at it in terms of the financial sort of cover of it, really. It's more so, like you said, the value that you're going to get out of that individual. And I suppose that leads me on to this next point, where typically if you see a young player coming into the game, and I mean, say young player, I mean, we're talking about potentially foundation phase or early stages of youth development, where they're thinking about moving more into that process of going into an academy, say, for example, early stages of becoming a pro. Would you kind of feel that it's the coach that comes first and then the mentor? Or do you feel as though, actually, do you know what, there's no harm, like you just said there about, if you feel that you need to invest in something within life, like you said, you only have one life. So actually, there probably isn't too much of a harm in getting a coach and a mentor alongside. Because typically, people have loads of coaches along the journey, whereas I tend to think that mentors, you probably only have about one or two within your playing career almost.
In this sense, I just want to clarify, are we talking one-to-one coach alongside what's going on at the academy? Because if you're saying transition to academy.
Yeah, I suppose it adds in a whole nother dimension, really, because then you have three people almost, or three settings almost. You have your recreational sessions or your team sessions where you have one coach to, say, 30 children. Then you, like you just said, you have the one-to-one coaching, which I suppose can probably happen at any stage of development, can't it, really? Because that's just an, again, additional source to your learning and your development. And then there's that mentor segment. So I'd say a mixture of all three, really.
For me, it'd be investment in a mentor, and whether that be paid or a lot of mentors happen unpaid.
Naturally,
every mentor I've ever had, I haven't had to pay. I just seek out. But I would say invest in a reliable, trustworthy mentor who has your best interests at heart. Because if you're going tossing up between that and a one-to-one coach, a lot of one-to-one coaches offer Sharpie work, basically, that you can if you browse YouTube or a whole bunch of different things, and you're that way inclined, you could recreate yourself at the park. Perhaps you won't get the fine motor detail in terms of correction, but you'll at least be doing the activities that will be able to sharpen those particular techniques that you're working on. Whereas a mentor will be able to expand your mind.
100%. I think as well, just when you were saying that, it made me think: coach, how; mentor, why; when; where. Almost to an extent, they'll ask those questions.
Coaches should be offering that. They just tend not to, and it's a lot of cones and how kind of deal. rather than the insight that is required at the higher levels.
Yeah, 100%. And then just kind of thinking about sort of the whole process of that coach and mentor, I think we've kind of had a really good discussion in terms of if we can almost segregate the two, and not what's more important, but just the different types of support in which both of these different sort of like classifications offer, really. But I think in terms of coming out of, say, for example, a lockdown, and probably there's been a lot of missed opportunities. And that's why, again, I wanted to kind of discuss this, because I kind of feel that over lockdown, there's become a lot of mentors for people, rather than as before, the word was, you know, people knew what it was, but it wasn't sort of, people wouldn't wear it as much on their chest. You know, they would say, I'm a coach, I'm a coach. Whereas I think over lockdown, and especially coming out of lockdown, a lot of people have changed that approach and gone to becoming a mentor, because actually they've had to support people through this lockdown period. And like you said, some of the key things in which, you know, it's not just technical. Yeah, we can do these Zoom sessions where, you know, you're showing a player how to do this called ball mastery exercise, but actually it's about so much more than that. And it's about actually getting them mentally prepared to go back into the game almost.
I mean, yeah, it's nice that there's that recognition, but I hope it persists, because realistically, that's what the role should have been all along. And I've always got in the back of my mind, one of the mantras that I tried to allow me to lead my life is that I'm my brother's keeper. That I should be looking out for the best interests of those that are affiliated with me, and that I keep within my tribe. And that kind of permeates everything that I try to do. And I'd hope that a lot of coaches out there see the truth or the value in that, okay, we might be coaches, but yes, at an essence, we are just mentors to these young people, to help them grow and develop and flourish.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, you touched on some really good quotes and sayings there. And I think that's, again, a bit of the difference within values and support behind ideas and processes, which mentors sometimes add. You know, coaches, again, you know, might relate it to, say, for example, a current player, and there's no problem with that. But, you know, when, like how you're breaking it down there, it's motivational, it's inspiring. Like, just like you said, in terms of the book, you know, how many players are typically reading books? You know, coaches might typically say, like you said before, go and watch a YouTube video. Okay, that will help you technically, might give you some ideas, but actually you can do that in your own time. But how many mentors, or let's take away the mentor tag for a second, how many individuals and people actually support it, like these players, by saying, you know what, check out this book, check out this workshop, which is working on developing yourself, listen to these quotes, listen to this audio book, and
a bit of meditation or something like that.
I think it almost offers a totally different aspect and outlook on things. So no, I think that's
might only long term have a 1% effect on their growth and development, but I'm sure every coach worth their salt would have heard of marginal gains and the 1% and that sort of thing. But so I don't see how people can't see the value in that sort of thing.
Yeah, and also, so if we're thinking about mentors playing a journey, or being along the journey over a long period of time, actually they can then go and check back in on those 1% gains. Whereas coaches might drop these things in, or not expect, but, you know, consider defeat almost, and going, well, do you know what? If they take away 1%, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, that's good. But how much are we then checking and refreshing the player's memory and mind? And I think with mentors, if they're there with them on that journey, that can happen a lot more often almost.
Yeah, totally. Because, you know, your normal coach, whether it be at grassroots or definitely in academies, they're only with the kids 2 years, and then they're on to the next age phase, and then with a different set of coaches. But even with grassroots, you might only have a kid 1, 2 years, 3 years, and then you've moved on, or the kid's moved on to a different place, whereas that mentor is consistent through their life.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, exactly. Like I said, hopefully through their life. But no, I think it's an interesting discussion, and I think it's definitely something which, like I said, I've noticed a lot more over lockdown, that the perceived mentor tag has come about a lot more. But like you said, hopefully it's something that persistently happens over a period of time, because I definitely think that players need both. They need both of these individuals, coaches and mentors. But mentors are a crucial part of their development, just as coaches are as well. So I think, yeah, it'll be interesting, and hopefully that sort of thing continues as time goes on.
Yeah.
But fantastic part of the discussion. Anybody who's watching and listening to this, I hope that you have gained a bit of more insight around what a coach may be, the roles and responsibilities they have, same as mentors. Don't forget to put your comments in the box below and let us know what you think. Maybe even as well mention a story about a coach or a mentor which you've had, and a journey in which they've played on your playing career so far. So yeah, let us know your thoughts. So for this next part of the show, I challenge the coaches with me on the day to pick a five-a-side team, and each week we have a different type of five-a-side in which I want them to pick. It's quite a fun topic and a good opportunity to pick their brains on different reasons as to why they may pick different types of players. So this week, I've challenged Mark to create a five-a-side team of Australian players to watch, and why he thinks those five-a-side teams of players to watch, Australian players, will fit into his five-a-side team. So, Mark, over to you.
Okay, so I've put extra conditions on myself this week. I chose players that I've personally worked with, just because I feel that I know them better to comment on, and I can speak from a more holistic kind of overview of who they are and how they play. So first off, for me, also I'm playing 5-0, so I'm playing fly. So we've got Alexander Robertson, who's a brilliant player who's now at Man City. Really technically awesome, and brilliant in combination. But it really his game sense and understanding of the game and how to play streets ahead from when he was very young. Then next we've got Ryan Teague, who's playing in Portugal at the moment. Obviously technically brilliant, but his leadership skills second to none. One of those that was just commands respect. And then a boy by the name of Alex Denmead, technically brilliant, and just creativity oozing out of him. Then we've got a boy by the name of Nectar Triantis, and just one of those players with a knack for positioning, and reads the game and pops up exactly where you want him at every single stage. And then rounding out my team, a young girl by the name of Emily Brewster, whose game sense and intelligence is just, when you work with a player and they're just smart, and you're like, wow. I enjoy working with those kind of players. So yeah, she goes on the team as well.
Fantastic. No, it's a nice five-a-side team, and just to give a bit of a sort of backlog to it as to why I've obviously got you to pick a five-a-side of Australian players. Obviously, like you said, it's your background. Obviously, you know the types of players which are coming through really well. And yeah, that's a fantastic team. And just some of the points to pick up on. So obviously, a lot of these players are obviously younger players. With those younger players, I think what's really important and really sort of great to hear from what the points that you've just made there is how early you can see their type of personalities and traits already. So, you spoke about some people being a leader, you spoke about how well players can take in and absorb information and then obviously relay it on the pitch. Do you feel though at young ages, it's harder or easier to actually identify these people for their personalities and traits, or do sometimes it get lost and we kind of just focus on their technical performances and displays in isolation almost?
Yeah, we do. I think it's dangerous to say that we identify those things in individuals, because realistically, as a coach, it's our job, if we identify that an individual does not have those traits, to teach them. because, you know, back in the day, people were taught these kind of things at home, but more and more they're not. And so it may not have been part of our purview or our role or responsibility as a coach, you know, 20, 30 years ago. But more and more it's becoming that, in that we need to see, okay, this individual needs to learn how to learn, which is, you know, when I was talking about Emily, she's really great at that. But that's because she's learned it at home. And so we need to go, okay, she's got that, but others within my group don't have that. How can I get them to be at the same level? And you're going to face obstacles and hurdles doing that. But it's beneficial for that individual in the long term, because otherwise another coach is going to come along and use that dreaded word, uncoachable, which I despise. No player is uncoachable. They just haven't been taught, or they haven't been taught how to learn properly. And that's what it comes down to, is people being a little bit lazy and not actually seeing what they need to coach in those instances.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting as well, because again, like you said about the uncoachable sort of tag, which, yeah, you hear far too often and too commonly as well. But something, again, which I really like about your team is that almost each individual, and don't get me wrong, some of those individuals probably have similar, you know, characteristics and traits and skills as an individual, but obviously some of the points you highlighted in particular for each individual. But how important do you feel that, as though within a team, especially between like a five-a-side team where there's even less players, it's important to have a mixture of those different, and I say skills, obviously, like you said, you'd hope that as a coach you'd bring out all of these types of parts of an individual, but in terms of it being sort of the main part of what makes them, how important do you feel it is to have a mixture of that within a team?
Oh, well, yeah, it's like with any group in life. You need people that are going to take the reins, people that are going to be the supporters and the drivers, and people that, you know, are going to challenge boundaries, because conflict is part of making a group strong. You know, your whole storming, forming, norming, conforming thing. And so without people playing multiple roles, it ends up a bit of a damp squib. So yeah, you definitely need a good mixture.
Yeah, 100%. No, the reason why I ask that as well is because typically when you think of academy settings, and when a lot of the players go into these environments or even RTCs, you know, they typically talk about, we want this player or this individual to become like player A. And player A is an individual who plays in the first team. They want everybody to almost form a mold into the same individual. But like you mentioned there about your team, which, like I said, I really liked about it, is they each have different qualities and traits that kind of, as a collective, builds it and makes it such a great five-a-side team. And I think that the dangerous ground is that if we just look for certain things, so say, for example, you know, you was building a team and you say, right, I want leaders in my team. Well, potentially 4 of those other players may not get into that team because leadership isn't their strong point. However, like you said, actually, leadership might be one of the key core skills which one individual has, whereas another player actually, like I said, it's their decision making. And actually, the two sort of complement each other and actually brings out a stronger unity within a team almost.
Yeah, because sometimes it can be a bit overbearing. You need that personality in the changing room who senses a tense moment and makes a joke, or you know, or lightens the situation, or is that person that, you know, can see a teammate being roused on by a coach or the captain or something like that, and goes and has a quiet word to them, because they just deal with people on a different level. So yeah, without seeing the value in the plurality of personality, I don't see how you can build a cohesive unit. And then I suppose it's a matter of players knowing and understanding that even if a coach is saying, we want you to be like X, well, no, I need to be like me.
Yeah,
I need to be like the best version of myself, and really have faith in that, because too often that starts a pathway towards a fixed mindset. You know, if I'm not doing this or achieving this, then I'm failing. But there's so much area for growth in other parts that they need to fully embrace who they are. And, you know, that whole know thyself. Yeah, you know, I'm still struggling with that at my age, you know, and I'm sure I will be for a while to come. And it's a lot to ask of a young person, but it's a worthwhile journey.
100%. And I love that quotation line you used there about, you know, it's not about being like player X, I should be like myself. And it leads on to this next point I was going to make, which, do you know what? I give hats off to you, although I'm not going to take my hat off. But a great point you made there in terms of when I asked you to obviously do your 5-side team, and we was looking at just, I just gave you the title of, you know, Australian players to watch out for. And typically when I've done these sort of 5-side things before, a lot of players have typically picked male players. And what I really loved about your team is how you chose a female player in there as well. And I think, number one, that shows the approach of, you know, football is for everyone, number one. Number two, you picked it based not on gender, but you picked it based on strengths of the individuals. And kind of how we mentioned there as well about the sort of how these individual traits, qualities, skills, whatever you want to label it as a cohesive, actually complements the overall strength and unity of the team. And I think what was great about that is that for me, I'll be honest with you, especially like how I am as a coach now, I'm all about the decision making, problem solving, people taking in learning, being able to almost do the test and exam of a game of football by themselves. And what you mentioned about Emily there ticks all those boxes. And actually, it's not to obviously say the other 4 players don't have those qualities and traits within them, but it was incredible to hear you mention that about Emily and say that that's actually what she is really strong at. And like you said, having her in the team. So yeah, fantastic part of putting her into the team. And it's brilliant to see that you put a team for males and females, because often people, when we perceive teams and people might typically watch the male game, they forget about the female game, which is totally wrong. So,
well, yeah, and that also comes from my background, where I know a lot of these players is foundation phase, early youth development phase, where you're playing mixed football because realistically, there's no reason for them to be playing separately, you know, up until a much later age, and so yeah, I've been blessed to see them in that kind of environment.
100%. And then just one final point I want to look at, because obviously, again, it was quite interesting even for myself when we spoke about you doing a team of Australian players. I mean, number one, the women's side, they're gone. You know, they're doing fantastic. Obviously, the Matildas, they're profoundly known within the women's game, and just how much quality they develop. And I think we're starting to see a lot more within the males game as well. Obviously, you can probably speak on this more, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of talk to you and touch base on how that development of football is going for males and females within Australia.
I suppose with the male side, there's been a dip over the last 15, 16 years since, you know, the golden generation of the likes of Kuehl and Viduka and those guys and their heyday in the Premier League, to now we're starting to see quite a few young boys come through. And that's predominantly because we had a change in development structure in Australia, which meant that not that many young kids were getting opportunities at first team, first division level. And so that has affected our development, our youth development, and then consequently the national team. Our women have been strong for a long, long time. And that's really great to see. I'm really heartened to see that we've got the World Cup there in 2023. I'm fingers crossed, hopefully still getting back for that one, to watch some games. But yeah, there's been significant investment across the women's game, and including, you know, expanding football to small-sided games, and then combining boys and girls up until a certain age has definitely allowed women's football to flourish quite a lot in Australia in the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting because obviously we mentioned there about sort of like the international setups and obviously in terms of club level. And obviously now you're seeing a lot of Australian female players coming over to, say, for example, the WSL. And obviously, like you said, in terms of the male players, well, like I said, they're getting a bit stuck in terms of that sort of first team fringe in terms of actually being able to break into those teams. However, the men's league is actually doing really well, and actually it's almost becoming a little bit, I don't want to say it's copying it, but it's almost becoming a little bit like the MLS in terms of now you're seeing a lot of players, and I'm not going to say older players because it's not to disrespect the league, but in terms of you're getting a lot of bigger names going over to there because potentially the clubs and the franchises are a bit bigger, especially even with, say, for example, Manchester City, obviously only in one of the groups over there, Melbourne City. So I think it's interesting, and to be honest with you, like you said, especially in terms of the Women's World Cup, I think that'll be interesting in terms of seeing, especially if they do really well, which I probably expect them to, how that kind of has an impact on Australian football going forwards, because it gives everybody a bit of a motivational boost, doesn't it? And especially in terms of finances, people and governments and organisations start thinking, well, actually, do you know what? We like that. We liked a bit of that. Shall we put a bit more money in and, like you said, really give it some push?
And hopefully the investment that goes towards it is directly linked to legacy stuff, which is football specific. Because, in Australia, we have a lot of different types of football. And often if one gets a whole bunch of funding for an event or something of that nature, everyone else wants their finger in the pie. And I think ultimately, after a long time, it's more than time's up for football to be a bit selfish when it comes to saying, no, you're not getting a slice of this pie.
100%. Well, I think, like I said, I think it's going in a good direction, especially in terms of, like I said, females in terms of the international side coming into WSL, and also as well, as you just mentioned there, along with some of the players who are obviously in Premier League, Championship level as well. I think there's a lot of Australian players really pushing on now and getting good opportunities. So but now back to your five-a-side team, fantastic five-a-side team, Mark. Anybody who's watching and listening in the comments below, make sure you put down your thoughts. Could your five-a-side team potentially beat Mark's, and maybe pick a different nation of players and see whether or not you can compare the two? But no, fantastic team and fantastic insight into players that hopefully we'll see hitting the main stages very, very soon. So this week on a Daily Coaching Football Show, I am pleased to be joined by a very special guest, somebody who has played in the MLS, the USL, and is also a Belize national team player as well. I'm delighted to announce that with us today, we have New York City FC player, Tony Rocha. What about in terms of boots? Because obviously for an outfield player, sometimes players like the boots which are, bright and are going to really show them off as a player, or sometimes people have those real sort of classic boots. Like I think when I grew up, I used to have the Adidas, World Cup boots. Real comfortable, basic design, but it got the job done. Can you remember what the first pair that you had were?
I don't remember the first pair of boots I had, but I remember they were, like you said, classic. Like, especially growing up as well, like I never had any flashy boots or any shiny boots. They were all kind of like black and white or kind of those colors.
Decent. I think sometimes it's better to have those, because if you get the flashy boots and
you don't perform.
Yeah, exactly that. So it's a lot easier to identify you. I suppose one of the benefits though of playing football or soccer in America is the whole college system. And I think that obviously, especially in England and even to this day, there's a lot of people that try and get opportunities to go over, because obviously you get your football / soccer opportunities, but then you also get education at the same time, which is so important. But how did you find that college soccer experience? Because looking at it on TV and looking at it through YouTube clips, it's amazing. Like you're playing in bigger stadiums and bigger capacities than some of the professionals over here. What was it like for you?
Yeah, no, like you said, it was definitely an opportunity that I'm thankful for, because I was able to get my education alongside still trying to become a professional athlete. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I think a lot of students there just have pride going to the school, so they go out to any sport that they could and just support the players on the team. And so that was pretty cool to kind of have that support behind you. And And yeah, it was definitely a fun experience.
Who did you kind of take inspiration from growing up? Was there, say, for example, a family member? Was there in the game, potentially in America? Or was there somebody like globally who you kind of looked at and thought, you know what, I would love to be like them one day?
I guess the player that I looked up to the most was Andres Iniesta from Barcelona. A lot of the games were televised here in the US. So just watching him every weekend and just going on YouTube and just watching a bunch of his highlights, I aspired to play like him and to be like him.
Nice. It's not too bad of a player to want to be like as well.
Yeah, but trying to be like him is way harder than looking up YouTube videos.
Both of the American leagues, the USL and also the MLS, it's grown so much over probably like the last 10 years, I'd say. What was that kind of experience like for you? Because I'm taking it, obviously, when you first came into the game, it would have been around that kind of time where, quite rightly so, the light was starting to be shined on American football, American soccer, and the growth of the game. How did you feel that kind of was from the outside of things? You'll see from your point of view, and quite rightly so, when people are first starting out within the game, you're just playing the game. That's your main thing. You're playing the game, wanting to see obviously how far you can go. But how did you see that kind of environment change in terms of sort of the coaching that was involved, in terms of the sort of ability of players that were sort of coming over / abilities being raised? Was it noticeable within your environment?
So when I first went from college to USL, the USL was still a new league. I think the MLS was barely maybe 10, 15 years into their existence. And so I guess there was hope that the league was going to grow here in the US. But even coming out of college, like my coach had mentioned, like, okay, maybe you shouldn't go USL, like stay and go to grad school or something, get I guess educated more and go that route. Like don't take a chance. And because it was Division II, like you weren't making that much money, like the competition really wasn't that high back then. But I think with the influx of money and the players that have been scouted and everything, and that has helped the league grow, both the USL and the MLS, it's definitely skyrocketed. And now I think a lot of players, as you've seen, have been scouted to come play in the MLS with their youth in like Brazil, Argentina, all these South American, Central American players want to come play in the MLS because it's growing.
So far along your journey, has there been any sort of real standout moments for you? Obviously, I know you had the opportunities to play, I think you got an appearance in the CONCACAF competition, and also obviously the playoffs in the MLS. But what would you say so far has been your standout moment as a professional soccer player?
It would probably be last or 2 seasons ago now, but just the season I had with New York. Coming from Orlando, I think we were 10th, 11th in the league, didn't make playoffs when I was there. And then coming to a team such as New York and being able to start a lot of the games and us winning the Eastern Conference that season, kind of just a change in my career from one year to another was not really a shock, but it wasn't something that I was expecting. And it was, I don't know, just a great year that I had, and kind of that, I guess, if I can encompass that one moment for that entire year that I had in that MLS.
What would you say is one thing which has kind of been the thing for you where you can go, do you know what, that's the reason why I love soccer or why I love football? Is it something to do with in the game, or is it something to do with, like you said before, kind of like, the atmosphere and the environment and the setting that you're in?
I would say 2 things. Definitely the atmosphere for sure. Just walking out to the field and having the fans, if you're at home, chanting for you, if you're away, chanting against you, like just having those goosebumps on just on your body whenever you're walking out there. And then another thing is kind of just after the games, whenever you're walking to the tunnel and you hear people screaming your name or wanting your autograph and stuff, like that's why I guess we want to be in the sport, for kind of that fame aspect of it. But that's definitely a good feeling after games.
I always like to ask players this because, obviously, congratulations in terms of getting to the stage you got at. If you thought about maybe, do you know what, I couldn't make it in football and soccer, what profession do you reckon you would have gone down?
I don't know, but I think if I had to guess, it'd probably be somewhere in the medical field. I know going into college, like that kind of the side of it, like I was interested in. So that's what I wanted to do, kind of going into college.
In America, is there a sort of big thing where perhaps before the game, music will be played and music will be put on to kind of boost that sort of adrenaline or atmosphere almost?
Music is always on in the locker room before our games. And like, even it's funny because like if someone gets a call or something and it stops the music, like everybody's up in arms. So like, yo, where'd the music go? What happened to the music? So like, yeah, music's definitely something that gets the locker room going, gets the atmosphere, and kind of gets us ready for the game.
You played for some incredible clubs in the USL and MLS as well. And I always like to ask people this, and it's not always necessarily based on ability. It might be based on personality. It might be based on sort of social elements. So you've got on really well with them. But if you had to pick a ultimate five-a-side team of players that you played with within your time, who would you pick in that team and why?
Goalkeeper will have to be Sean Johnson, that I'm playing with now. I guess the defense would be Maxime Chenot. He's on the team now. Kaka. Up top would probably be Kyle Larin. I played with him in Orlando. So that's three. And then midfielders would be Maxi Morales. And then Yoshi. I played with him in Orlando. He plays at Cruz Azul now in Mexico. So those are probably the five-a-side that I'd pick.
I have to ask, obviously, what is it like playing with Kaka? Because obviously, again, yourself, midfield player. When you play with players like that, and there'll be players that look up to you like that as well. What is that like? Do you sort of almost A, try to replicate their game, or B, do you just try and sort of absorb as much information and take away as much information as you can, and then distribute it as and where you're kind of needing it within your games in certain situations?
Yeah, I just try to absorb as much information from him as possible. I know just during training, if we're on the same small-sided team, just like learning from him, watching his movement, just those little things that kind of separates him from everybody else's things that I try to pick up on and kind of just try to learn from them.
Cool. So for this week's tweet of the week, what we do is we look at a tweet from Twitter and we kind of look at the meaning behind the tweet. We look at arguments for and also arguments against it. So for this week's tweet of the week, we're looking at: imagine being a kid looking forward to getting back to football with your mates, and the first session the coach has planned is a fitness test and running. Mark, what's your first thoughts when you hear something like that?
Unfortunately, that it could be true.
Yeah.
Like quite legitimately, we're now third lockdown. Yeah. And coaches have had 11 months to prepare their next session. Even though there was that small bit in between where we were allowed to coach very briefly. But it wouldn't surprise me if there were coaches out there. And that's genuinely scary, because it borders, well, it is poor practice until the coach has been notified. Otherwise, I view it as tantamount to abuse. That might be a strong word, but it kind of fits in that kind of scenario. So.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's interesting, and don't get me wrong, I'm not necessarily saying that this is something which I genuinely believe in, but it's an interesting point you made there, because I was going to come with the point of, well, do you know what, maybe coaches are looking at it from an approach of, do you know what, like you said, we've been having stop-start seasons. You've probably only got about, let's say, for example, a month and a half left of the season, and that's putting on the competitive coach's head rather than, well, actually, like we mentioned earlier on, you're with these players over a long period of time. But from a competitive coach's head, you know what, we've only got about a month and a half left. Can I almost be bothered to plan a session? But I think the point which you made there, which is good, is that it's true. They've had about 11 months to be able to look at session ideas, session designs, session plans. And although they haven't been able to practically put it out on the field, surely you almost burst into the gut to go, let me try some of this.
Creative. And even if they hadn't had that amount of time, just that mentality whereby I won't be bothered. I'm sorry, but you have children's lives and development in your hands. If you can't be bothered, get out.
Yeah,
that's just the way I see it. If you don't see the value that you have to an individual and their growth, and you're going to do it half-cocked, half-assed, then don't do it at all.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's a fantastic point. And I think it kind of goes on to the basis as well of, at the end of the day, two points to the argument here. Number one, these players haven't been playing football. They've been out of the game for so long. So I suppose some coaches are coming into it and probably thinking, and I don't know why typically there's this stereotype of every time there's a break in a season or every time there's a break in play, if you want to call it that, we need to get the players back up to their fitness levels. Well, why necessarily has their fitness levels dropped? Yes, they haven't been playing in competitive games, but who's to say, depending on their level, they still haven't been active? Who's to say, actually, there's obviously big debates about warm-ups and things like that. You know, are warm-ups actually needed? And I think, in a way, it's like, so what if they haven't been as physically if they haven't continued, physically active during this period of time, as say, for example, they would have been at training. Well, at training, they're only with you for about an hour a week, if even that, actually, because you know, physically, they're only probably playing for about 40 minutes, something like that. Yeah. So it kind of doesn't weigh up, does it? Almost.
No, and especially since most of the tasks that the coach that I've got in my mind's eye right now that's running this session wouldn't be doing tasks or activities that have anything to do with football. They'd be doing shuttles, or they'd be doing laps, or all sorts of, they'd be doing crunches and medicine ball work and lots of ladder stuff. You know, some of that components of it are related to football, but if they're not replicating the actions specifically that they're going to do in the game, then why are we doing it? It's a waste of time, you know. And then doing stuff without the ball, there's studies that show that athletes expend up to 70% more energy when they're moving with the ball at their feet or in their hands. So why then, if we've got the studies to show that athletes are more engaged physically when they use the ball, would we not use the ball all the time when we're doing fitness type work? You can incorporate it very, very easily, whether that be, okay, we're going to do a positioning practice where, okay, we're just going to expand the size a little bit, and that means that their repeated sprint ability is going to be tested a little bit more. Okay, that's a way to build your returns into the practice, as opposed to, oh, okay, we're gonna do shuttles today.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you make a great point about with the ball there, because something which I thought, something which has been ever so present throughout this whole lockdown, is the amount of online Zoom sessions for ball mastery type movements. Well, actually, hold on. If these coaches have been putting these types of sessions on, surely the first thing you want to do as a coach, especially as a player, because like I said, as a player, they haven't been actually playing competitively or basically within competition, in terms of, even if that's a game within your training session. But surely the first thing you'd want to do as a coach is to see, okay, well, that ball movement exercise, which I've been developing and teaching them and getting them more comfortable and confident on the ball, surely you want to see that on the first training session back. You actually want to see them demonstrate it.
Yeah, go do some things, and then building on from that whole idea of people being isolated for the last year is that, okay, we've been working on all this ball mastery stuff, but then you recognize that what we're talking about is a team game where, okay, we've been so isolated from people haven't learned, or some kids, especially at key development stages, have missed out on the ability to learn about their relationship to others and how they work within a team or an organism or an organization. And so that is going to need so much work over the next little while. Why would we spend it just doing fitness work?
Yeah, and you almost go into your own isolated bubble again, because, you know, you're purely just focusing on your fitness levels. And like you said, actually, these people haven't been around their friends. They haven't been around their social, you know, buddies, which they come to football sometimes just purely for anyway, let alone the elements of to play football. So yeah, 100% agree with that. I think that it's so important that why would you then restrict them from being able to be sociable, whether that's playing with or against others, or even discussions like, you know, sharing ideas. Well, how can you share ideas on fitness levels? Well, you know, if you run with your arms in more of a diagonal approach, or do you know what I mean? There's no conversation that can really be had there.
Biomechanics in like the biomechanics of that sort of thing are relational to the individual utilizing them.
Yeah.
You know, if people really broke down Usain Bolt's stride pattern, one of them's longer than the other, and you know that's because he's got a hip thing. But you know, who's to then go, okay, but that's not optimal running position. Just because it works for so and so, it doesn't mean it's going to work for him. He found what works best for him. Let him do it.
Yeah, 100%. And do you know something that concerns me as well is it goes back to sort of the mentor stuff, and we were talking about it being very sort of psychological heavy. And like I said, for me, I think that that's a craft and that's a skill in itself. You know, being able to be a psychologist almost of sport and of football. And for me, it's exactly the same with physical elements. Like, don't get me wrong, as a coach, we should always be trying to see if we can implement those four corners. So the technical/tactical, physical, psychological, and social. However, to say that I'm an expert in the physical corner would be a lie. You know, I can give ideas and I can put in little challenges and I can put in types of mechanisms to support that, which isn't going to be just doing shuttles and isn't going to just be running over hurdles. But I think it's such a specialism area. That's why, for example, in teams, you know, or like first teams I'm talking about, or even academies, you have designated people for this. You have fitness coaches, you have strength and conditioning coaches. And I think for a coach, which
psychologists on board.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, this tweet, if say, for example, that we're typically looking at it as the approach of this would be happening in a grassroots setting, for a coach to be able to say that they're looking at fitness testing, well, the only way I can think that they can test this at a grassroots level or within sort of like your recreational sessions is a stopwatch. How quickly can you do it? And that isn't testing. That's just recording. That's recording your time. Testing is, like we said, when we look at this specialism area, heartbeat, you know, sort of your anaerobic, your aerobic systems, you know, the amount of maximum capacity in terms of explosiveness and all of these key terms, which, like I said, goes over my head. And when I'd done it at university, you know, I was writing it down, meaning and understanding of it, totally different things. So it's interesting when someone says something like, we're testing we're doing our fitness tests. We're testing your levels of fitness
or something like that.
Yeah, it's very sort of, like I said, it's a record of time rather than actually testing these individuals. And obviously we don't know the age of the players here, but you know, I don't think it's almost right for it to come in at any stage, let alone a sort of foundation phase.
Oh no, yeah. And so the thing, like, what is the ultimate goal for that coach? Even if it was at an academy setting, I would question the value of it, because ultimately you're dealing with children or young people that are going through like lots and lots of growth moments, and they're dealing with a whole bunch of other stuff: school, parents, friends, all that sort of thing. Being in lockdown, potentially, I don't know, they could have had COVID. So what are you're gonna judge them against the result that they got this time last year before we got into lockdown? It's just mental.
Yeah, no, 100%. And again, even when you look at and break down what fitness actually is, I mean, typically we think of, you know, running over long periods of time, where, you know, studies have shown that doesn't even happen within football. You know, we've got this persona of, you know, you're running around for 90 minutes. You're not, you know, it's very stop, start, short bursts, explosive energy. So doing something like the bleep test, no game relevance at all, you know. So it's interesting, like I said, when you hear this term testing almost, and a point you made there about lockdown was something I wanted to pick up on as well. You know, put yourself in a position where, say, for example, you're taking your kid, doesn't really matter which age, but you're taking your kid along to their first session back. And let's say, for example, like many families and individuals have happened to them during lockdown, people may have lost jobs, or they may be not as financially well off as they was before. Now, remember that any session you go to, very rarely are they free. You're paying for this service. And it goes back to the point we was making earlier on again about the coach versus mentor element. You know, you're paying for a service, you're paying for the value. Well, number one, are you getting value if all they're doing, you're taking them to a football session and all they're doing is running around a pitch a million times? And also, you're paying for that. So what are you actually paying for?
I mean, and here's the thing about value is it's all in the eye of the beholder. It's all about perception, because people can tell me that Yeezys are good all day till they're blue in the face, but they're still the ugliest shoe in the world, right? So, and the same is true of coaching. I'm certain there'd be parents out there that go, man, he run them hard tonight. That was definitely a good session. And I've heard parents say it, and parents think that, you know, if a kid says they enjoyed it, but that it was a good session, that doesn't necessarily make it a good session. It's a bit like the kid that says, oh, I want to play in goal, or I want to play up front. Okay, you could let them do that, or let them enjoy the session week in, week out, but you don't let a kid just eat chocolate for every meal that they have, right? Yeah. So it's the same kind of equivalence in my mind.
100%. I think that brings to point two things which you mentioned there. Number one, I think it's clear to see that you won't be wearing Yeezys back on the first training session after lockdown. And the second point as well is about the perception element. I think so often, and I'll be honest with you, I was one of those children when I was younger. If nobody else said anything, if everyone else just got on with the task at hand, I would perceive it as, yeah, it was a good session. Yeah, everyone else seemed to not, well, I say enjoy it. Everyone else didn't seem to raise any concerns or any issues. So yeah, it was okay. Like the session went well. So I think it's that perception thing from player point of view and also parent, because like you just said, how many parents do we know of, like, you know, run harder, oh, you've got to get faster here, and you know, it's in a way, it's almost a dinosaur effect when we talk about coaches, but you almost see it as that's what happens with football when it isn't what happens.
I think there's a lot of the case of people asking the wrong questions. So much like, you know, when I'm tutoring, first few days, you know, I might ask a coach, how did you play at the weekend, and they'd answer, you know, oh, we won 2-0 or 3-0 or something like that, and I'd be like, I didn't ask what the score was. I asked how you played. Oh, okay, we played good. But slowly, if you ask it long enough, they'll answer the right way. And there's a change, because often it leads to them being more reflexive about actually how did they play. The first time they might be like, oh yeah, we won 1-0. Yeah, we dominated them, when in actual fact it was just a ball up the guts that got them 85th minute or something like that. And they haven't really perceived that. But the more they talk with that language, the more they are able to perceive what is and isn't good. The same with a coaching session. The question shouldn't be, did you enjoy that session, or was it good? It should be, what did you learn? What were your takeaways? And then dig deeper into that in order to see, okay, where is the value here, and to perceive it correctly.
100%. And again, it's like I said, it's those open questions, because again, like I said, if you ask, was a session good? Yes or no? Yeah. That's the only two answers they're going to get. And it's interesting as well, because, you know, I'm not, again, you know, saying that this should be at the forefront, what this person's saying in terms of that being the first session back, but you could almost include, not fitness testing, but you could include fitness as being a bit of a focus, but in a different way. And I think it goes back to like the point you made about perception and the way in which, not necessarily you're going to ask a question in this element, but how you organize and control that environment. So it might be that, say, for example, you're focusing on fitness, but like you said, you might play it in, say, for example, a really small pitch where you're going to get constant transitions. So actually players are constantly changing direction, they're constantly changing speed over short little bursts. And actually you're getting that to come out as a coach, but players just see it as playing a match almost.
Yeah, exactly. You throw a ball in and make it a game of a sort, you gamify it to a certain degree, and automatically the intensity and the interest level in it go through the roof. People don't drag their feet anymore when they're supposed to do anything, and they don't go, the little kid. I saw a session late last year, late last year, where a kid literally turned around to me and he was like, I don't know why we're doing this. And I was like, yeah, I don't know why you're doing this either. But, you know, I couldn't say anything at that stage. But that's the reality of it. Like, there will be kids in that session that see straight through it and just go, this is, you know, not right.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's what it kind of boils down to, that even just us from coaches as reading that tweet, it just sends out all the wrong signals. So if you're a player, especially your motivation coming back to a session, we're going to be working on fitness tonight compared to we're going to play a match tonight. You know, the motivation, like you said, the competitiveness, the realism, the relevancy that it's all going to bring out will happen naturally. You don't need to put that emphasis on it as a coach almost. So I think the key thing here, and kind of taking the sort of, you know, straps and bones away from this tweet, is really you as a coach being creative and bringing, if you want to bring these sort of things out, and I'm going to take away the testing terminology off it, but if you want to bring fitness out within your session and you want it to be a bit of a focus, and I say a bit of a focus, it shouldn't be the primarily focused point in the session, but if you want it to be a focus, then it's just being creative and understanding how to bring it out relevant and real to the game, but then also meeting the demands and needs of the players as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, but no, it's interesting. It's an interesting tweet, and that's why I thought I'd raise it, just because, like I said, I think going out of lockdown and into the first session back, from players are probably thinking, what are we going to be doing? Coaches are probably thinking, what are we going to be doing? So it's an interesting.
Driving to the session, look at their watch, going, what am I doing tonight?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, probably more so when they actually get onto the pitch and they've got the cones in their hands. But nice. An interesting tweet. Again, as I always mention, people who are listening and watching, make sure you put your comments down in the comments box below. Let us know if you're a coach, what are you thinking about doing for your first session back with your team? If you're a player, what would you like to happen within that first session back within your team or within your session, and also comment on some of the points which myself and Mark have raised, and see if you agree or disagree. But yeah, no, fantastic discussion. So for the next part of the show, we look at the coach's challenge. And what I do with the coach's challenge is the coach who I have on with me on the week, I look to try and set them a challenge around designing a specific session around certain outcomes and certain scenarios and situations which I've put into the session. So for this week's coach's challenge, what I've done is I've given Mark the challenge of designing a session based around it being suitable for a foundation phase group of players who are of a mixed ability and are looking to develop their movement on the ball and with the ball. So Mark, over to you. What have you got?
Okay, so I refined the challenge a little bit. So I've gone with real young ones, just so in my mind I can picture how I'm going to play it. So the game we're going to play is called Penguins, and it is basically a box with players inside. Everyone's got a ball, and it's really good this time of year or when there's a cold snap on, because I get the players to pretend that they're penguins and the ball is their penguin egg, and so they have to shuffle it around between their legs, moving around the area. Then I set a challenge after a little while, after they've had a bit of practice at it, trying getting them to count how many touches that they can get within a 2-minute time frame, trying to engage a bit of higher order thinking whilst doing the action in order to get their brain to disassociate from what they're doing with their feet, so that they can start building those synapses to think about different problem solving whilst doing the action. Then maybe do another round of that where they try and beat their own score. And then I'll develop that further into a progression of it called Squash the Egg, whereby you're still counting the amount of touches you get, but then if you squash somebody else's egg, you add an extra point to your own tally. And then you might take that further by saying, okay, if you squash somebody else's egg, you add to your tally, but if your egg gets squashed, then your score reverts to 0, for example. It could be, the penalty could be up to you and up to the group you're working with. You might even take that further if your egg gets squashed or you accidentally go outside of the bounds of the area, then your score goes back to 0. And then in and amongst that, I'd probably use predominantly pair and share kind of intervention strategies. So every time there's a break in between rounds, I'd get individuals to pair and share, and then make sure that they're pairing and sharing with different people each time, in order to cross-pollinate ideas within the group.
Nice, fantastic. Do you know what I really like about that session? Because obviously we're looking at a foundation phase group, and obviously there's going to be potentially mixed ability. So each of them, obviously, in having their own ball, will be able to almost set their own type of individual challenges, really, because obviously they're all going to be different levels of comfortable and confidentness on the ball. But then what I really like about it is the theme. I think so often, again, coaches typically just go, right, kick the ball, move the ball. And even myself, when I set you the challenge, obviously I talked about moving on and with the ball, but where you've been really creative there is you've brought it down to the foundation phase level, and you've given it sort of themes, characters, a story almost along the way. How important do you reckon that is at that foundation phase age group level of adding themes and stories?
It's really important. Like this practice, and I use it, full disclosure, I use this quite regularly at that age group. It's so much fun to put on, because I get to walk around like a penguin, and the kids make penguin noises, and it's just a laugh. And then you can extend that challenge those that need to be challenged. There's, rather than walking like a penguin, can we skate and push the ball out with our laces in front of us? And you can change it up all different kinds of ways, but so long as you're consistent with the story. And I think storytelling is important, because it really hooks kids early on, especially at that foundation phase.
Yeah, 100%. And almost like, especially if it's got characters as well, you want each of them want to go at being a character. It's almost like being sort of like, even the attacking and defending elements of the game, oh, I want to be an attacker. Oh, let me be a defender. Let me be the goalkeeper. It's exactly the same with the storytelling and the characters. Let me, say, for example, be the penguin. Let me be the person who squashes the penguin eggs. And it's a bit of motivation almost for people to, rather than just kicking the ball. And again, it's interesting because from the outside and from people looking in, all they're seeing is people moving around with the ball. It's great, obviously, in terms of development, but they're not understanding. For a kid, you start thinking all sorts of things. I want to keep and protect my egg, so I'm going to keep it really close to me. I need to make sure that if I do go and squash somebody's egg, well, where's their egg going to be? How do I need to position myself and change my direction or turn my body to be able to get into a position where I can actually squash someone's egg? Now, this all links into later stages of development of the game, where it's attacking and defending, where it's understanding, how do I win the ball from an individual? How can I protect the ball from an individual? So I love the crossover in terms of the storytelling to actual realism of the game side of things as well.
Yeah, so two things for me is in that they're also learning stuff like, how do I keep my ball close while getting somebody else's? Which, that links to being able to cope with pressure later on when you're trying to tempt defenders to commit to then play around. But then also the transition element of, I'm not kicking the ball away, I'm putting my foot on it, because further down the line, I'm going to want that player to go in and try and win that ball, and win it cleanly and keep it and play it. And so if they're taught from an early age to kick it out, then that's all they're ever going to learn. And then I lost my place. Can you edit this bit?
Well, just while I was thinking on it, something I wanted to pick up on was, we mentioned about obviously getting lots of touches on the ball. There's a whole repetitive element of it. Do you know what I mean? Because for me, especially if I'm a player as well and I'm going into a session, you want to play the game, don't you? You don't want to you don't want to be off the ball all the time. Yes, obviously within a game of football, there's times where you're going to be off the ball, but ultimately you're there to play football. So in you coming into a session like yours, and you telling me, actually, do you know what? You get to spend about 10, 15, 20 minutes, however long it may be, kicking around the football. I'm loving that, because that's what I'm there to do. Whereas so often we see sessions where people aren't on the ball.
Yeah, no, it's crucial. And going back to what we were talking about before, doing the bleep test, rather than spending time with what the thing that you've been craving the last 9 months, getting kids active, but getting them familiar with and loving the ball first and foremost.
Yeah, no, 100%. And just on a point on that, so say, for example, obviously, like I said, I love the creativity behind it. I love how you've linked it in with sort of like a story and, you know, characters and things like that. And I think it's definitely specific for that age group. But say, for example, if you was looking at a foundation phase age group and you had really sort of, I'm going to kick myself for saying this word. Actually, I'm not even going to say, I was going to say elite players, but I hate that word. Higher ability, or actually, do you know what? I'm going to even delete that word. More experienced players. So you have more experienced players at that age group. How would you look to try and challenge it? So say, for example, you've got the 5 or 6 or 7 year old who, do you know what? And it's crazy to think this, but has been playing the game for like the last 4 years and it really understands football. How would you sort of implement that squashing of the egg element to really try and challenge them into more of a football type story almost?
They're in the same group, or is it a group of players? Is it still mixed ability?
Yeah, so say for example it's like 2 people, so to make it so it's a bit easier, maybe you could have like a sort of 1v1 almost or something like that. But yeah, there's these 2 stand-up players within that group.
And I mean, there's a million and one different ways to skin a cat. You know, just off the top of my head, I could layer it with ultimate bib champion kind of game. So for those that don't know, you start off with a bunch of spots on the floor, and you just have bib tucked in. The player at the end of the game with the most bibs is the one that wins. If you steal a bib, you can insert it in your trousers and or your shorts while you're standing, unable to be touched on a spot. You've only got like 5 seconds or whatever on a spot. But then if you layer 2 separate systems, now that player has more things to think about. They have extra challenge. They have 2 separate systems of scoring going on at the same time. So they need to learn to prioritize, okay, which one am I going to go for? And what is more beneficial to me? So I might throw that at them. If it's just 1 or 2, I might have a think about what it is that they're deficient in or they need further work in, and see if there's a way in which I can isolate that particular technique. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to go with that.
No, that's fantastic. And I think, yes, it's like you just mentioned there's so many different ways you can do it. And I suppose it goes back down to the person again. You know, it's really just being able to pick the right challenge and the right type of sort of structure that you'll put onto their, I say conditions, don't mean just like, you know, they're restricted from doing anything, but the sort of environment you'll set for their individual game, whereas it might still be coming out within the same group where others are playing, say, for example, in that penguin head. For somebody else and that more potentially advanced player, more experienced player, it might be necessarily the elements of, right, we're attacking, we're defending, we're trying to think about our body positioning and, you know, how we turn and how we protect not only the ball but also the bib. But no, it's fantastic.
Yeah, in my mind, I'm thinking now that because that could become quite a chaotic environment, I might also definitely strongly consider a safe space somewhere within the practice, in order to allow players who feel a little bit overwhelmed in that moment the opportunity to go in and have a breather and that sort of thing. So yeah, but all depends on the people that you've got in front of you.
100%. I like that idea as well, again, about the safe area, because I think especially at that younger age group, and like I said, if it is a mixed ability and, you know, let's say, for example, there's that player who's of, you know, really low experiences to football and they're just coming into it, and actually they're just there straight up for the penguin element of it. They're not there for the football part at all. They just want to be a penguin. Probably don't even want a ball or an egg, but they just want to be the penguin. I think, yeah, definitely for that area as well. And also, again, it goes back to the start of the discussion we had in the discussion of the week, where actually you're putting in these little nuggets almost for these people to think about. We're actually going in that safe space. How am I going to get out? Where am I going to move to? How quickly do I need to move out of this area? Where's the dangers? which journey or destination, which journey am I going to go on? Where's my destination and where I'm trying to get to? So it gives you a bit of a thinking bank almost, just as well as a sort of safe area.
Yeah, it allows them to then process in terms of a hierarchy of order, what is most important. And some people, based on experience, are going to be slower than others. It was exactly the same when I learned how to drive. I didn't, you don't notice the car inching out of the driveway or something like that because you're too focused on the road that's straight ahead. You don't know how to perceive what's noise and what's signal. And players or people only get that through experience, and sometimes you need a safer space for them.
100%. And yeah, you probably don't realize it until that car actually hits you, and then you soon do realize it. But
you drive again.
Exactly. But no, it's interesting again. And one final point I wanted to pick up on as well, which I really loved about the session, is like I just mentioned about that element of the car hitting you. Obviously, then you know about it, but obviously you then have a reflective moment as to, how did that happen? Why did that happen? And what can I do differently next time? And I think the good point which you made about, typically you see it at that level of the game, the foundation phase age group. And I know as being a mentor as well, like yourself, I always used to try and advise coaches that, there should never be any outs. Coaches have this big thing of it being very super ultra competitive. And, if someone kicks your ball out or someone tags you, you're out. Well, actually, no, like you just said, you get to carry on. But all you expect from that player almost is that reflective process. Now, whether or not that actually happens, but you're giving the player an opportunity to go, why is my egg always getting crushed? Am I getting too close to these players? Am I not moving away quick enough? Am I doing a good enough job at actually being able to protect the ball and move with it, taking lots of touches? So yeah, I love how, like you just said, there's that element of you're not out, but instead you get to carry on, continue to repeat the movements and almost have that element of trial and error.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes from coaches not having seen how to do it without being out before, or how to do it without being out well. And even then, to the reflective process, you can build that into your practice. If there was a safe space, all it would take would be for the coach to then say, if your egg's squashed, go into the safe space for 1 minute and have a quick think about why it got squashed and what you can do next time to stop it getting squashed. Then you can go freely and play again. And then that kind of allows the player to build that rhythm of, okay, there's been a hiccup, something's happened. Let me analyze it. Okay, what am I going to do? And they have to systematically go through that process to then go, okay, this is what I'm going to change, and come to a resolution. The coach might have to guide them at that age, but it's definitely beneficial, because that's that whole learning to learn process that we were talking about right at the start, or in the private side.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think what I love again about that session, and kind of round it off, is it's simple, but super effective. It's a simple, nice, easy setup for coaches to follow and potentially replicate. But there's so many effective outcomes that can come out of that session, whether it be the technical elements, or it be the social and competitive fun element, whether it be also, it's very physical, because you're constantly moving on the ball. You're understanding when to move quickly, when to slow down, when to change your direction. And obviously as well, it brings in all those psychological elements of it. And that's exactly why I do this coaches challenge, to provide coaches with ideas from different experienced coaches, and bringing their experiences and knowledge as to why sessions are done in the way they are. So yeah, no, fantastic session, Mark. And again, as I always say, people who are watching and listening to this, comment in the box below. Let us know what you think of the session. Have you ever done anything similar to that? Would you potentially try it out with your age group that you're working with your team? And also, what types of other progressions would you potentially put in, or could you put in, if you tried this session out? But yeah, no, Mark, thank you for that session. Fantastic. So that's the end of the Daily Coaching Football Show. I just want to say a massive thank you to Marc for joining us today. His knowledge has been incredible, his experiences. It was really important for me to try and get him on today's show because obviously I know Marc away from this show, and I know his experiences from coaching in various different countries, obviously his experiences within coach education as well, and I think it's shown throughout today's discussions, and he's been a vital part of the knowledge, input and insight behind these different discussions. So Marc, massive thank you for coming on. Marc, what are you currently doing? Is there anything you'd like to maybe promote in terms of work you've got coming up, or which people can try and get in touch with you on? So say, for example, on your social media channels.
Thanks. First off, thanks for having me on. It's been a real delight having this chat. As for socials, I think you'll pop them in a card at Ossico on Twitter. I've got a lot of coaching stuff, a lot of eclectic coaching stuff that I post on there if you're interested. At Ossicorin, on Instagram, there should be lots of photos of puppies coming up soon on that. Otherwise, once lockdown's over, I'll probably be doing quite a few one-to-ones around South London, mainly based around Kennington, Lambeth, that kind of area. So if anyone wants to get in touch, let me know, and we'll take it from there.
Fantastic. Well, listen, anybody who's watching and listening to this, I highly recommend you get in touch with Marc. Number one, obviously, to give him a follow on both his social media channels and see the work that he's doing, and also if you're an animal lover, and also as well in terms of the one-to-one stuff. Listen, that's the reason why I've got him onto this show, because of his knowledge and his experiences in which he's being able to provide. Obviously, you've heard it throughout today's discussions, but also in terms of the actual technical side of the coaching as well. Massive advocate of the work that he's doing. So yeah, don't be afraid to get in touch, and I highly recommend it. And as always, make sure that you like, comment and subscribe to this channel. And yeah, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's show, and hopefully you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one.